In 1941, Operation Barbarossa officially began. German forces launched a surprise invasion of the Soviet Union with thousands of artillery guns and bombers. The Brest fortress was engulfed in a sea of fire. Before they could even react, the soldiers found themselves trapped in the nightmare of war amid smoke, explosions, and devastation. A young recruit had not yet completed his military registration. He had no name on the roster, no official identity, yet he would become the man who fought until the very end. Deep beneath the earth, he was about to write a story that history would never forget. On June 22, 1941, Lieutenant Nikolai had just stepped out of the gates of a military academy. Filled with hope, he arrived at the Brest fortress to report for duty. At that very moment, several flashes of light suddenly tore across the sky above the fortress. At first, everyone thought it was merely thunder. But when explosions erupted right beside them, they realized it was not thunder at all. These were German bombs, shattering the non-aggression pact between the two nations. The war had officially begun. When Nikolai regained his senses, he suddenly remembered that he had not yet completed his enlistment paperwork. He immediately rushed toward the regimental headquarters. Without official military status, he would receive no weapon and earn no honor. Even if he fell in battle, no one would ever record his sacrifice. As Nikolai painfully crawled out of shelter, the sight before him left him speechless. The once mighty fortress had been reduced to a field of ruins. Panicked soldiers ran in every direction like a disturbed swarm of bees. Many were cut down beneath the relentless bombardment. At that moment, a bomb crashed down from the sky and exploded violently, leaving Nikolai dazed. Before he could recover, another blast erupted nearby. The powerful shockwave hurled him high into the air. The moment he struggled back to his feet, another bomb dropped directly in front of him, blocking his path. Fortunately, Nikolai escaped death by mere inches because it was a dud. Still trembling from the horror, he abandoned the idea of reporting in and instinctively sprinted toward the ammunition depot. No matter what happened, the fortress gate had to be defended. But just as he reached it, another devastating explosion mercilessly threw him into a deep shell crater. When Nikolai finally regained consciousness, he discovered that German troops had already broken into the fortress. They showed no mercy, gunning down scattered Soviet soldiers. As Nikolai tried to rise, a nearby Soviet soldier quickly covered his mouth. The Germans were only a few steps away. The two men had no choice but to lie among the corpses and pretend to be dead. Only after the Germans moved on did the trembling soldier ask, "Where are we supposed to run now?" Nikolai replied that there was nowhere left to run. There was no fear in his eyes, only determination burning like fire. "We cannot run. We have to reach the armory, get our rifles, and hold this fortress." While the German troops were distracted, the two men suddenly sprang out of the shell crater and sprinted toward the weapons depot. Every second that followed became a race for survival. Along the way, Nikolai jumped into another crater, where several Soviet soldiers were still holding their weapons and making a desperate stand. Nikolai picked up a pistol from the ground and immediately joined the fight, but his ammunition quickly ran out, leaving him no choice but to continue toward the weapons depot. The Germans soon spotted him and unleashed a storm of bullets in his direction. Fortunately, Nikolai reacted quickly and dove into a pile of rubble just in time, escaping death by mere inches. But inside, there were only wounded soldiers and not a single usable weapon left. Filled with anxiety and despair, Nikolai risked his life by returning outside. There, he spotted a soldier sitting nearby. As he approached to ask for the exact location of the weapons depot, he realized the man was already dead. Even at that moment, despite feeling utterly hopeless, Nikolai refused to stop. Eventually, he reunited with the main Soviet force inside a heavily damaged building. When the regimental commander noticed the lieutenant's rank on Nikolai's shoulder, he immediately appointed him as his aide officer. Just 5 minutes later, Nikolai received orders to lead another squad in an assault on the church windows on the left side. Although he had not even completed his official enlistment process, the situation was so critical that he had no time to worry about it. Accepting the mission, he quickly organized his men and put a battle plan into action. With a single command, the Soviet soldiers launched an immediate counterattack. Fearlessly, they charged toward the fortress's central high ground, the church itself. At that moment, the Germans had only recently captured the fortress. Their forces were still scattered, and their defensive lines had not yet been fully established. They were completely caught off guard by the ferocious Soviet counterattack. Before long, they could no longer hold their positions, and were forced to retreat in disorder into the church. The Soviet troops immediately pressed their advantage and pursued them. Inside the confined space, the two sides plunged into one of the most brutal close-quarters battles imaginable. After a night of bloody fighting, the Soviet forces paid a terrible price in casualties, but they ultimately succeeded in reclaiming the central sector of the fortress. It became the first victory with a clearly defined military objective achieved by the Red Army since the outbreak of the war. Afterward, the regimental commander assigned Nikolai the task of defending the church, while he withdrew to search for reinforcements. The Germans, of course, had no intention of giving up. That very night, they launched wave after wave of counterattacks, but every assault was repelled by the Soviet defenders. Even so, everyone understood that darkness had limited the Germans' ability to operate effectively. When dawn arrived, a much larger attack was certain to follow. As expected, the moment daylight broke, German forces assembled in strength and launched a massive assault on the church. The German soldiers who had been hiding in the church basement seized the opportunity and broke out as well. At that moment, the Soviet defensive formation immediately descended into chaos. Realizing that the position could no longer be held, Nikolai had no choice but to lead his comrades in a temporary withdrawal. The church once again fell into German hands. After capturing it, the Germans immediately began broadcasting messages through loudspeakers. They promised lenient treatment if the Soviet forces surrendered within 1 hour. Otherwise, they would launch a devastating assault. But they had clearly underestimated the fighting spirit and determination of the Soviet defenders. Taking advantage of the brief window while the Germans were still waiting for a surrender response, Nikolai quickly regrouped his forces and launched a counterattack. At that moment, the Germans were still trapped in the illusion that the Soviets would surrender and had lowered their guard. By the time they realized what was happening, Soviet soldiers had already reached the very base of the church. Led by the Red Banner, the Soviet troops launched a fearless charge with complete disregard for their own lives. The Germans panicked and were caught entirely off guard. Once again, Soviet forces stormed into the church and plunged into brutal hand-to-hand combat. The overwhelming momentum of the Soviet assault quickly shattered the German defense. The survivors fled in panic, desperate to save themselves. The church returned to Soviet control once again, but after recapturing it twice, their ammunition supplies were now critically depleted. Nikolai decided to take another soldier and search for additional ammunition at a different weapons depot. But halfway there, they were spotted by a German patrol. The soldier turned back, signaling for Nikolai to run, before suddenly charging straight at the Germans. Nikolai immediately turned and fled, only to discover that 2 other German soldiers had appeared and blocked his path. Unarmed and with no other option, he was forced to raise his hands and pretend to surrender. A German war correspondent excitedly pulled out his camera, eager to capture this humiliating moment. However, in the very next second, Nikolai took advantage of their distraction and leaped into a nearby pit. The Germans rushed forward and tossed a grenade after him. Fortunately, the wooden planks behind Nikolai suddenly collapsed, sending him plunging into a bunker below and saving his life by the narrowest of margins. When he regained consciousness, Nikolai was overwhelmed with relief. He discovered that this place was the very weapons depot he had been desperately searching for all along. Without wasting a moment, Nikolai and the trapped soldiers inside quickly began manufacturing a large supply of explosives. As night fell, they gathered weapons and ammunition and headed back toward the church. But along the way, they suddenly came under intense artillery fire. To his horror, Nikolai watched as large groups of German troops launched a nighttime assault on the church. Although the defenders fought with every ounce of strength they had left, their lack of ammunition made prolonged resistance impossible. The church quickly fell once again. Watching the battle slip beyond his control, Nikolai was consumed by despair and wanted nothing more than to fight to the very last breath. Fortunately, a few of his comrades managed to pull him back into the bunker in time. After returning to the shelter, Nikolai sank into deep self-blame. He believed that because he had failed to deliver weapons and ammunition in time, the loss of the church and the deaths of his comrades were entirely his fault. Overcome with despair, he raised his pistol and pressed it against his temple. At that very moment, a young woman stepped in front of him and tearfully said, "If you die like this, who will protect women like us?" Those words struck Nikolai like a powerful blow and brought him back to reality. Slowly, he lowered the pistol and broke down in tears like a child. After crying his heart out, he shaved his beard, changed into a clean uniform, and decided to keep living. Just then, the bespectacled soldier rushed into the bunker and reported that a soldier had left without Nikolai's permission. Realizing how serious the situation was, Nikolai immediately gathered a group and chased after him. The soldier was carrying a white flag and slowly walking toward the German lines. The moment Nikolai saw this, he was consumed with rage. He raised his weapon and shot the traitor on the spot. Then he fired a second shot, killing the German soldier standing beside him. Furious, the Germans immediately opened fire in response. As waves of German soldiers rushed toward them, the two men split up in an attempt to escape. Hidden by thick smoke, Nikolai quickly jumped into a shell crater. He lifted a wooden door and crawled underneath it to hide. The bespectacled soldier, a young recruit, took cover in another crater and was unable to find him. The Germans swept the battlefield with flamethrowers, blasting fire into every crater to burn alive anyone hiding beneath wooden planks. Fortunately, the wooden door above Nikolai was thick enough to block the searing flames, allowing him to escape death by the narrowest of margins. After the Germans moved on, Nikolai hurried to search for the bespectacled soldier, but all he found was a notebook lying on the ground, and he realized that the young man had most likely been killed. By this point, only Nikolai and the veteran soldier remained inside the bunker, still stubbornly fighting on. One day, while hiding among the ruins, the two men spotted a group of German soldiers holding a ceremony to celebrate the capture of the fortress. The veteran was furious. Raising his rifle, he unleashed a deadly hail of bullets at the German soldiers who were receiving medals. Caught completely by surprise, several Germans dropped to the ground like falling leaves. Once they recovered from the shock, they quickly scrambled for cover and returned fire. Vastly outnumbered, the two men dared not stay and immediately began to retreat. But the German firepower was overwhelming, and the veteran was struck in the leg. Nikolai quickly helped him withdraw back to the bunker. Although the veteran was still alive, there was no medicine or bandages inside the shelter. He knew that no matter what happened, infection would eventually claim his life. From this moment on, Nikolai could only continue the fight alone. Inside the pitch-black bunker, Nikolai took advantage of the maze-like tunnels. He would appear and disappear through different exits, launching surprise attacks against isolated German soldiers before vanishing back into the darkness. To gather intelligence on German operations, Nikolai captured an unlucky soldier for interrogation. The young woman acted as a translator. The German claimed he was not a combat soldier, but merely a guard who had recently been assigned to the fortress. He revealed that the Germans had established numerous firing positions and mobile units throughout the fortress. Whenever Soviet resistance was encountered, reinforcements were immediately dispatched. He also insisted that he had only been standing guard and had never fired a shot. Begging for mercy, he said that he had an elderly mother and young children waiting for him back home. Because of his compassionate nature, Nikolai believed the man's story and eventually let him go. No one could have imagined that this act of kindness would bring a terrible disaster upon him. Not long afterward, German troops arrived in the area, but despite searching everywhere, they were unable to discover the hidden entrance. Furious, the Germans began blasting flames into every possible hiding place, while those inside the bunker remained completely unaware of the danger. Before long, the Germans had reached the very entrance to their shelter. The moment the flamethrower was fired, flames instantly flooded the passageway and surged deep into the bunker. Watching their friend burn like a living torch, Nikolai and the others were overwhelmed with agony. Yet there was nothing they could do. The veteran soldier, witnessing the horrifying scene, was also consumed by grief and rage. After comforting the young woman, Nikolai noticed the veteran tying several bundles of grenades together. With a gunshot wound and an infected leg, the veteran knew his time was running out, but he refused to die in humiliation. He told Nikolai that no matter what happened, he must protect the young woman and protect himself. After saying those words, he lay down on his bed and pretended to fall asleep. Although Nikolai knew the veteran had already prepared himself for a heroic sacrifice, he still wanted to stop him. He stood guard at the entrance throughout the entire night until exhaustion finally overcame him, and he drifted off to sleep. When he suddenly woke up, he discovered that the veteran's bed was empty. The two of them immediately rushed out of the bunker to search for him. They soon found the veteran standing atop the fortress wall, silently watching rows of German soldiers marching below. Then he raised the bundle of explosives and jumped without a moment's hesitation. In that way, the veteran took countless German soldiers with him, using his own life to compose one final heroic farewell. From that moment on, only Nikolai and the young woman remained inside the bunker. Just as before, Nikolai continued leaving the bunker at night to scout enemy movements, and occasionally ambushed German soldiers with carefully aimed sniper fire from advantageous positions. Together, they patiently waited for Soviet reinforcements to arrive. During that time, Nikolai also found love with the young woman. The two depended on each other to survive inside the bunker. She bandaged his wounds, while he told her stories about springtime in Moscow. Amid the sound of gunfire and explosions, they even made promises about the life they would share after the war. Day after day passed. On the 66th day of the war, Nikolai suddenly noticed something unusual. Inside the fortress, large numbers of soldiers were lined up along both sides of the road, waiting to welcome an arriving motorcade. A luxurious Mercedes slowly drove into the fortress, followed by several escort vehicles. Two men stepped out of the car. One had a small mustache, while the other was dressed in an Italian military uniform. Crowds gathered around them as photographers continuously snapped pictures. Nikolai guessed that these men must be high-ranking figures within the German alliance. Quietly taking aim, he hoped to seize the opportunity for a surprise attack. But before he could act, the two men had already moved out of range. What he did not know was that one of them was Benito Mussolini of Italy, while the other was the failed painter Adolf Hitler. He had unknowingly missed the only opportunity in his life to potentially alter the course of the war. By the 135th day of the conflict, fate once again turned against the young couple. Through a narrow crack, Nikolai noticed German soldiers leading a large group of women into the fortress to clear away the rubble. Despite being extremely careful, he was still spotted by a sharp-eyed woman. Startled, Nikolai quickly hid himself. But what surprised him was that after her initial shock, the woman did not alert the Germans. Instead, she excitedly whispered to the others that our soldiers were still alive inside and that the war was not yet lost. Looking through the opening, Nikolai saw smiles gradually appear on their faces. Taking advantage of a moment when the Germans were distracted, the woman quietly approached and secretly slipped a small package through the gap. When Nikolai picked it up, he discovered that it contained freshly cooked potatoes. For Nikolai, who had gone more than 100 days without a hot meal, those few potatoes brought an indescribable sense of warmth and deep emotion. He also realized that these women were not prisoners, but civilian laborers brought in from the city by the Germans. What brought him even greater joy was what happened later that night. Mira, his beloved, told him that she was pregnant. The happiness of becoming a father briefly allowed Nikolai to forget the cruelty of war. But he also knew that the bunker lacked food, medicine, and every necessity required for a safe childbirth. Thinking of the women who were clearing rubble inside the fortress, Nikolai realized this might be the perfect opportunity for Mira to escape. The following day, Nikolai dressed his girlfriend in civilian clothing. While the women were busy removing debris, he quietly allowed her to leave the bunker. Disguised as an ordinary laborer, she carried bricks and blended into the crowd. At first, the women were shocked by Mira's pale and exhausted appearance, but they quickly and quietly accepted her into their group. Seeing that, Nikolai finally allowed himself a relieved smile. But things were not as simple as he had hoped. Just as the women finished their work and lined up to board the trucks, the foreman suddenly noticed that there was an unfamiliar face among them. After taking a closer look, Mira was quickly exposed. Having gone 3 months without bathing, she carried a strong odor that immediately drew suspicion. Believing he had captured a female Red Army soldier, the foreman saw an opportunity to earn recognition. He immediately dragged her before the German authorities. Tragically, the officer he reported to was the very German soldier whom Nikolai had once spared. To conceal the fact that he had previously been captured by Soviet forces, the man instantly ordered Mira's execution. Her body was then mercilessly thrown into a deep pit. Through a narrow opening, Nikolai witnessed the entire scene. His fingernails dug into the cracks of the brickwork. He clenched his teeth so hard that his lips bled, forcing himself to remain silent while his heart filled with unbearable grief and rage. In that moment, he silently swore revenge for both his beloved and their unborn child. By the 163rd day of the war, every last bullet inside the bunker had been fired. If he wanted to continue fighting, His only option was to sneak out at night and search the ruins for ammunition. That same night, the foreman responsible for Mira's death called out to his companions, but no one answered. Instinctively, he stepped forward. Suddenly, a gunshot shattered the silence, and the foreman collapsed to the ground. Moments later, the German soldier who had ordered Mira's execution was also shot dead. Nikolai had finally avenged his girlfriend and their unborn child. But the gunfire revealed his position. German troops immediately returned fire, forcing Nikolai to retreat. During the chaos, he tripped over a rock and quickly crawled into a nearby pile of rubble. By now, winter had arrived. His footprints in the snow allowed the Germans to pinpoint his location almost immediately. Hiding beneath wooden planks, Nikolai realized that discovery was only moments away. He pulled the trigger without hesitation, only to find that his weapon was completely out of ammunition. The Germans instantly opened fire. When no response came, they switched tactics and began thrusting their bayonets through the floorboards. After several strikes, one bayonet pierced straight into his body. Nikolai gritted his teeth and endured the searing pain without making a single sound. Just as the Germans prepared to stab downward again, Nikolai spotted a rat nearby and quickly waved his hand to scare it away. The moment the rat darted off, the German soldier's attention was diverted, allowing Nikolai to escape death by mere inches once again. Even after surviving that ordeal, he continued holding out inside the bunker and had no intention of retreating. By the following spring, the bunker had long since run out of both food and ammunition. When the Germans finally found him, it was already the 300th day since the war had begun. After spending so many months living in complete darkness, his eyesight had failed him. Nearly blind, he could do little more than feel his way forward one step at a time. As his weapon was taken from his hands, Nikolai felt as if an officer was supporting him, and as if his fallen comrades were standing beside him once more. Witnessing the scene, the German officer was deeply shaken and asked him who he was. Slowly raising his head, as though gazing up at the sky itself, Nikolai replied, "I am a Soviet soldier." Filled with respect, the German commander immediately ordered his men to form two lines and salute Nikolai. What they did not know was that the man who had fought until the very last moment had begun as nothing more than a young recruit. He had never even completed his enlistment process, had no official military status, and his name appeared on no roster or record. Yet through 10 months of relentless resistance, with an unbreakable will and unwavering determination, he showed the world what it truly meant to be a soldier. The story may be over, but its impact remains. This film is not only the story of an unknown soldier, but also a powerful portrait of the indomitable human spirit in the face of war's unimaginable brutality. When every name has been erased from records, it is courage and faith that make people immortal. What about you? Would you have had the courage to stay and fight like Nikolai? And that's the end of today's movie. Thank you all so much for watching. I truly appreciate your support and look forward to seeing you again in the next story.